41 past the hour, the Trump administration has frozen more than $2 billion in grants to the country's oldest university, Harvard, after the college refused to accept demands from the White House. The Trump administration issued a letter to Harvard with a series of demands, including eliminating its DEI program, screening international students of ideological concerns, and leadership reforms. The president of Harvard released a statement that read in part, quote, "No government, regardless of which party is in power, should dictate what private universities can teach, whom they can admit and hire, and which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue." And just in the last hour, the president is hitting back at the school. NBC's Garrett Haake has more from the White House. Garrett, good morning. What is the president saying as of now?
Jose, the president is in the mood to escalate this fight with Harvard still further. In his Truth Social post, he speculates about the university losing its tax-exempt status as an educational institution. He makes some factually questionable statements here about the idea that the university being taxed as a political entity. There's not really any such thing. But he argues that if they continue to push political elements, that they should lose that tax-exempt status that most schools and universities have. It is not, as with many things related to this president, especially clear if that's the kind of thing he can do unilaterally or through pressure on the IRS to strip a university of their tax-exempt status. You wouldn't even normally talk about it in a more traditional administration, but this president has shown no real qualms about leaning on the various executive agencies ostensibly under his control to exact exactly this kind of political retribution, Jose.
So what can the White House actually do? Any idea of what he's planning next?
Well, look, they still have this task force in place, which operates independently from the Department of Education and has been going after various universities, first for policies that they might view as anti-Semitic, and then going still further, as we saw here in the case of Harvard, to look at other elements of their admission procedures and DEI. They could make life miserable for Harvard by opening investigations under the Department of Education or by using this task force. They've already shown a willingness to cut off some federal funding to the university, but there are other federal programs that are available to Harvard students that might also be targeted. I don't think we know yet exactly how creative the administration wants to be in extending this fight, but I do see that Truth Social post from the president as if not an order, at least a suggestion to the IRS that they better start looking for more ways to punish this university.
Garrett Haake at the White House, thank you so very much. And joining us now, Andrew Manuel Crespo, a law professor at Harvard and general counsel of the Harvard faculty chapter of the American Association of University Professors. Thank you for being with us, Professor. What's your reaction to all of this, including the latest Truth Social post by the president?
I think the president's post makes clear what this is all really about. Donald Trump wants to control what is taught in America's universities. He wants to try to use all of the tools of the federal government to break the backs of these institutions unless they parrot his own preferred ideology. This is a page straight out of authoritarian playbooks. If you look across history and across the globe, when people come into power who want to try to maintain and control power in a way that's contrary to the basic norms of a constitutional democracy, they attack some of the core institutions of civil society. They attack the press, they attack the courts, they attack the legal profession, and they attack universities. And that's what's happening here, and the president isn't even pretending about it. His Truth Social message makes clear that he wants to change what he views as the ideology of what's being taught at American universities and make it more to his liking. He wants them to be following the Trump syllabus instead of the syllabi that have been created by these universities over the past century that have made them the shining example of what higher education should look like in the world. He's going to break the back of American universities if he persists this way, but I'm proud to see that universities like Harvard are standing tall and saying this is a red line. You cannot have the federal government trying to tell people what to teach inside of our universities. It violates the First Amendment, it violates the laws of our country, and it is flat-out dangerous authoritarian moves.
So, Andrew, do you actually think that the president of the United States could, to use your term, break the backs of universities in our country? I mean, what will this what is already going on, these funding freezes, what will that mean for Harvard? And how do you see the possibilities of the president breaking the back of universities?
Well, this is exactly why our chapter, which is a chapter of faculty members here at Harvard University, that's part of a national organization called the American Association of University Professors, this is why we went to court Friday night and filed a lawsuit to stop this from happening. What Donald Trump is threatening is unconstitutional. This country has a First Amendment. It guarantees the freedom of speech. The Supreme Court has made clear that academic freedom at universities is a central component of that freedom of speech. It is against the fundamental law of our nation to try to tell a private university that it has to change who is teaching, how they are teaching, what they are researching, what they are writing, what they are saying in their classrooms, what they are saying on their campuses, to threaten people with loss of funding or other types of coercive measures from the government to get them to change what they're saying, violates the First Amendment of the United States. It's plain and simple. So no, I don't think he's going to break the backs of American university, because American universities are going to stand up against him, as Harvard is now. And I hope to see universities across the country standing firm and united against this onslaught. Is it going to be hard? Yes. Is it going to be painful? Yes. But are we going to prevail in it? I think we are, because we have the Constitution on our side, and we have the core principles of academic freedom and the role that these universities play in democracy as the reason for why we're doing it.
You know, interesting that you talk about the core principles. Is it a constitutional order for the federal government to fund institutions of higher education?
Absolutely. Congress has the power of the purse. And for the past half century and more, Congress has thought it was useful for the country, and it has proven to be incredibly useful for the country, to have a partnership with our leading research universities. That partnership has produced cures for some of the most intractable diseases. That partnership has led to advances in technology that have made us the economy that's the envy of the world. Our partnership between Congress, the federal government, and research universities has been something that has been so beneficial for the American people. That's the partnership that President Trump is now trying to unilaterally end. He's doing it against the will of Congress, which appropriated these funds and which put in place an entire statutory scheme in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that says how these funds are to be regulated. President Trump is disregarding all of that. He's ignoring Congress's statutes. He's ignoring Congress's will. He's ignoring the will of the American people. Our constitutional democracy depends on having universities that are not just leading the way in research, but that are helping us understand the core aspects of our democracy. I teach at a law school. We're talking about the rule of law. Donald Trump's threatened by schools that talk about the rule of law because he is a threat to the rule of law. When we have these types of programs and institutions threatened, it's a danger to the country, and it's the reason why these institutions need to and are now starting to stand up and fight.
Andrew Manuel Crespo, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.